Evert's muscle memory was ingrained in her at the age of 5 when she began hitting tennis balls under the watchful eye of her coach and father, Jimmy Evert. The sound of balls coming off her racket in rhythmic measure could be substituted for a metronome that musicians use to keep tempo. Her two-handed backhand was flawless and emulated by players around the world, young and old, who wanted to hit the ball as cleanly, smoothly and as precisely as Chris Evert did. Evert had grace and beauty. She was cool, calm and collected, with the steely focus of a cardiac surgeon. Evert's concentration on court was intense. Margaret Court said, "She concentrates to the last point. It makes her a champion. Even when she is losing, she concentrates and never gives up." Evert was stoic and commonly referred to as the Ice Maiden, between the lines, a quiet, deadpan champion. The only noise coming from her side of the court was the constant ping of balls being returned back again and again and again. Evert had inherent athletic gifts that blossomed quickly. She was a relentless and fierce competitor. Her focus and grit could not be disrupted under any circumstance. She was poised, patient, and particular about her game. It also earned her the nickname Little Miss Cool. Regardless of gender, she will always be the model of excellence, and her career is populated by many stellar accomplishments, such as Chris Evert was the first player, male or female, to win 1,000 singles matches and compiled a career match win record of 1,309, only behind Martina Navratilova, who won 1,442. Evert won 18 major championships. Chris Evert won at least one major singles title 13 years in a row. Chris Evert won 157 singles titles in her career. She was the first player to cross the 150 mark. Evert had a stunning winning percentage of 90%. She was ranked 1 or 2 in the world from 1975 to 1986, in total 260 weeks. Chris Evert won 7 French Open singles titles, a tally that has only been surpassed by Rafael Nadal. Chris Evert also won 6 US Open singles titles. At one point, Evert won 55 consecutive matches in 1974. Chris Evert also was the first female player to reach $1 million in career prize money in 1976. The Evert household was in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and soon Chris would become a household name and recognizable face to the entire world. Her father Jimmy, who taught tennis at the nearby holiday park, helped groom a mini tennis factory. Evert's brother John and sisters Jean and Claire were all terrific players. Jean was a professional tennis player in the early 1970s, and all 4 of Jimmy's children won titles as junior players at the prestigious Orange Bowl tournament in Miami. Chris Evert's two-handed backhand was developed out of necessity more than desire. She was a slight youth, not strong enough to hit a one-hander, so employed 2 hands, and before long it became the most impenetrable backhand in the history of tennis. Chris Evert was a 5 foot 6 inches slugging machine, not the biggest player on tour, but it hardly mattered when her ground stroke accuracy was the best in the game. They were hit deeply, effectively, and with pace. All of this attributed to preparation and underrated foot speed. After winning the national 16 and under tournament, she was invited to compete in an 8-player tournament in Charlotte, North Carolina. She advanced to the finals after defeating reigning major champion and world number 1 ranked player Margaret Court 7-6, 7-6. Playing Chris Evert on clay courts would later become a complete exercise in futility. She would compile a 72 wins to 6 defeats match record on the wet clay at Roland Garros and rack up 7 French Open titles, won in 1974, 1975, 1979, 1980, 1983, 1985 and 1986. "I was hungry to win every point," Chris Evert said. "It was all about what am I going to eat before my match? How much sleep am I going to get? Who am I going to beat?" As a 16-year-old who attended St. Thomas Aquinas High School, Chris Evert made her major tournament debut as an amateur at the 1971 US Open at Forest Hills and thumped German Edda Budding 6-1, 6-love. Her next three matches all went three sets, with Evert coming back from behind each time to defeat Mary Ann Eisel, François Dour and Leslie Hunt before eventual champion Billie Jean King put a halt on Evert's run as the youngest semi-finalist in the history of the US Open when she defeated Chris Evert 6-3, 6-2. That afternoon on the grass courts in New York set Evert's career in motion. Remember, in those days, US Open was played on grass. She remained an amateur until turning professional on her 18th birthday in 1972, signing a racket deal with Wilson to commemorate the occasion. Evert then began her assault on the record books, winning 18 major singles titles and appearing in 16 additional finals. Before her 21st birthday, Chris Evert had already won the US Open twice, Wimbledon twice, the French Open twice, the Italian Championships twice, and the arduous Virginia Slims Championship three times. Chris Evert tacked on three major titles in women's doubles, the 1974 and 1975 French Open and the 1976 Wimbledon doubles title. She won 6 crowns at the US Open, 2 were achieved at the Australian Open in 1982 and 1984. Prior to her arrival at Wimbledon in 1972, the British media dubbed her the Ice Princess, and Chris Evert would accommodate the description with workmanlike precision in winning 3 titles at the All England Club in 1974, 1976 and 1981. During her nearly 2 decades on tour as a professional, Chris Evert was never ranked lower than number 4 in the world and ended the year ranked number 1 7 times. She was never once beaten in the first or second round of a major tournament and was a semi-finalist in 52 of the 56 majors she played. She will not carry anyone and she will never tank a match. She is the ultimate professional, said the venerable Bud Collins. The 1974 and 1975 tour seasons saw Evert win 16 WTA championships each year, but 1974 was particularly impressive as Chris Evert reeled off a 55-match winning streak, won the 1974 French title and Wimbledon title as well, advanced to the Australian Open finals and made the US Open semi-finals. She compiled a stunning 103 wins to 7 defeats record and won 16 of 24 tournaments she entered. Chris Evert's career spanned the inaugural years of Open tennis and into the modern era, enabling her to compete against the old guard players like Virginia Wade, Yvonne Goolagong, Rosie Casals, King and Navratilova, and the young hotshot breed of power hitters like Steffi Graf, Monica Seles and Gabriela Sabatini. Of those players who were ranked number 10 in the world or higher, Chris Evert was hardly ever on the losing side of all-time head-to-head competition. She went 40 wins to 6 defeats against Virginia Wade, 26 wins to 12 defeats against Goolagong, 19 wins to 7 defeats against Billie Jean King, and a close 37 wins to 43 defeats against Martina Navratilova. She held a 6 wins to 3 defeats advantage over Sabatini, 2-1 versus Seles, and went 6-7 against Steffi Graf. There were 22 players ranked in the top 10 that Evert never lost to in 5 or more matches, and 10 others that managed only 1 win when facing Chris Evert 5 or more times. The primary rival of Chris Evert was Martina Navratilova. She faced Chris Evert in 14 major finals. Evert won 4 of those, the 1982 Australian Open, the 1975, 1985 and 1986 French Open. Navratilova won 10 times. In 1976, Chris Evert told Sports Illustrated, "I am not glamorous, I am not beautiful, I don't want to be on a plateau higher than anyone else. I don't want the younger girls to be in awe of me. I talk to them about their matches, congratulate them on key victories. I ask them to practice and hit with me. Not many of the older players came over and asked me to practice when I first came up. I think that's important." In December of that year, she was named Sports Illustrated's Sportswoman of the Year and depicted on the magazine cover. Chris Evert played for the United States in the Fed Cup competition 9 years, winning 8 titles. Chris Evert also served as president of the Women's Tennis Association twice and received the Flo Hyman Award on 2nd February 1990 by President George H.W. Bush, who called her the role model for our nation's young women. President Bush was also present at her induction into the International Tennis Hall of Fame in 1995. Admiration and respect for Chris Evert from fellow tour players ran deep when Zina Garrison defeated her in the quarterfinals of her final US Open In 1989, 7-6, 6-2, she openly cried and apologized for winning at courtside. The two hugged as they walked off the court together. It was difficult to determine who had won and who had lost. The Queen of American Tennis departed Louis Armstrong Stadium poised and dignified. "I am so glad I came along when I did," Chris Evert said, "with Arthur Ashe, Billie Jean King, Stan Smith as role models, and alongside me was Bjorn Borg, Jimmy Connors and Martina Navratilova. It was the tennis boom. It was personal. We were close to our fans and we had enough money."